Okay, Pnawn da Baw, good afternoon. Welcome to our Shelter Cymru Facebook live broadcast. This is the first one of these we've done. Today we're going to be talking about campaigning, talking about what we've been doing in Shelter Cymru so far, taking stock of where we've come in Wales over the last few years, and talking about where we go next. And we really want to hear your thoughts on that too. My name's Jennie. I'm the campaigns manager. I've been at Shelter Cymru nearly 7 years now, I think. And I manage the campaigns team, so obviously my day-to-day work is all about understanding what's happening to our clients and understanding what problems people are facing, and then describing that to people in power and getting them to improve systems so that fewer people become at risk of homelessness in future.
Hello, I'm Puzey. I'm Director of Shelter Cymru. Notice the name is Shelter Cymru, not Shelter. We love our sister organisation in England, but we have been independent from them now for about 35 years, so a long time. An independent Welsh-based charity focusing our efforts and our campaigning, our services on the needs of people in Wales, and that's a really important issue. So when we talk about the campaigns we're involved in, when we talk about what we want to do, when we hear from you what you want us to do, it is all about what we can do to change issues in Wales for the better for people struggling or facing homelessness or housing need. Yeah. So that's who we are.
I think it's been a really eventful few years in the whole area of housing and homelessness, and I think we've managed to achieve a lot, but as ever it's always a challenge to know where to place our efforts. There's always so much that needs doing. You know, we worked with nearly 20,000 people last year across the whole of Wales. So many different issues that come to the surface, so many problems people are experiencing now. The challenge is always to prioritise what we do, because there is so much that needs doing. If you think about what we've achieved around homelessness in Wales over the last few years, so back when I first started in Shelter Cymru, we had the old homelessness system. It was very much an all or nothing homelessness system. If you were in priority need, then you got social housing, which is a fantastic outcome, affordable, secure housing. If you weren't in priority need, you didn't get very much, frankly. We have been working really closely with Welsh Government and with local authorities in Wales over the last few years to put in place a new homelessness legislative framework. So that means that people in Wales now have more rights if they are at risk of losing their home. They are more likely to get the help that they need. We've been working really closely with them, but it's been quite a process, hasn't it?
It has been quite a process, and I guess it's an ongoing process as well. We haven't finished. And I think one of the issues is we've introduced this new type of legal framework, which I guess in some ways it is the envy of certainly the rest of the UK. Yeah. And now we've getting a kind of bit of copycat legislation in England. Mm-hmm. But it's all very well just introducing legislation. It's about the outputs. It's about what it actually means in terms of services, how it actually changes people's lives. And we've been very keen about the kind of culture change in services that new legislation should be driving. And we're seeing some really good outcomes as well. Some local authorities working in partnership with organisations like Shelter Cymru and others are doing some really excellent work now, aren't they, in terms of working with people facing or experiencing homelessness. But we still have some who are less good in that area. So there's still much more work to do, I think, about creating that new service culture. And for me, that service culture is very much about working much more in partnership with people facing or experiencing homelessness, rather than, in a sense, just handing down to people, this is what you're going to do, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. It's actually trying to understand from people who are experiencing these problems, what is it they need to get into a safe and secure home? What is it that the service is working with and can do to help them get there? So much more about that kind of partnership approach. We've seen very good examples of that, but at the same time there are still patchy areas where you're not seeing that kind of culture change coming through.
Definitely, yeah. It's still a work in progress, yeah. Definitely. But I think that we're achieving good things in Wales, even though we've got less money to spend on homelessness services. And even though homelessness is increasing across the whole of the UK, homelessness of all types is increasing, which is, I think, very much linked to levels of poverty in the UK and the kind of the wider factors that influence that. So, it's really brave that the Welsh Government decided to change the law during this time when we knew things were going to get tough. And yeah, they have got tough. Yeah. But, at the same time, our research and our casework both have seen some really inspiring stories of people being helped more effectively than they would have under the old system, and people who are, single households who might have some vulnerabilities, but they're not quite vulnerable enough to be classed as vulnerable, still getting the level of help that under the old system they wouldn't have had.
Absolutely.
So, we've been plugged into this for a really long time, and when I started in Shelter Cymru, under the old system, we were, I think, the only ones really making the argument that, look, we're spending all of this public money in Wales on administering homelessness tests. Are you in priority need, and carrying out investigations and finding reasons not to help people, when actually it would just be cheaper and better for the people just to help people and not to worry so much about whether they're in this group or that group. So yeah, there's we've got loads of stuff on homelessness over the next few years that I think we will be doing. Safe to say that definitely will be a priority for us.
Just in case you're just joining us, I'm John Puzey, the Director of Shelter Cymru.
I'm Jennie Bibbings, I'm the Campaigns Manager at Shelter Cymru.
And we're talking about campaigns, and we want to get from you some ideas from you about what areas you think we should be campaigning on in the coming time.
We've had a couple of comments through. One of them is, what can we do about empty homes?
Okay.
Well, we actually did quite a lot on empty homes a few years ago, and it's true to say that the number of, what we're talking about here are long-term empty homes, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're not talking about somebody who's in the process of selling somewhere or whatever, but we're talking about, I think usually the definition of long-term empty home is something that a home that's been empty for more than 6 months, isn't it? And we're talking also mainly here about the private sector. I know a lot of people think about social sector empty homes, but actually it's really the private sector where you see significant numbers of empty homes, and absolutely it's got to be an issue, hasn't it? We know there's increasing demand from people for affordable homes. We know that homelessness is very high. We know that there are long waiting lists for social housing, and if at the same time there are thousands of empty homes, and there's an estimate that probably around about 26,000 long-term empty homes in Wales, then quite rightly we should be saying, well, why can't we put those to use? Why can't we actually make those available as affordable homes for people who desperately need them? And if you've got an empty home down your street, you will know that it blights that street. You know that all kinds of issues can occur, fires can occur. So nobody wants empty homes, whether you live in a road with empty homes or whether you're somebody who desperately needs somewhere and think, why can't I live there? So absolutely we need to do something. We did quite a lot of work on it a few years ago. I think we were quite instrumental actually in getting the Welsh Government to think about the issue and introduce a revolving loan scheme, which is still going on.
Yeah.
But there clearly needs to be more, because there's still a lot of empty homes out there and there's increasing demand, as we've been saying, for those affordable homes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that, as John said, we did a lot of work on it up to a few years ago, and it went up the political priority agenda. But despite that, the numbers do seem to be remaining pretty stubbornly high, and that they're not going down. In fact, they're continuing to increase. So what more can we do, I know some councils have increased council tax, so that if you've got an empty home, you're paying more than 100% council tax, and that's something that we did, we pushed for, and we welcomed. But there are also, there are other things that could be done here too, and I'm wondering whether local authorities are making the use out of the powers that they do already have to bring homes back into use. So if you've got, an empty home on your street, it's just sat there, it's a wasted resource. Why should the local social landlord not take that on and take over the management of that home and make it available for people who are coming via homelessness, for example? I know some housing associations in Wales, I'm thinking of one in particular, did have an empty home scheme that was really good. So could we get more of that happening in Wales too? So we're doing a bit of work at the moment to look at what local authorities have been doing around empty homes in the last few years. Are they using their enforcement powers enough? I think our aim is that we will kind of develop this into a campaign for next year.
I think it'd be interesting to hear from local authorities whether they believe that the powers they have are too complex in a way, too difficult to use. If that's an issue, then it may be that it's something that we would look at in Wales in terms of simplifying some of those areas, so it's an easier process to do, whilst at the same time balancing the rights of people who actually own property, of course. So I think it'd be really interesting getting feedback from local authorities why they can't do more with the powers they have, because they have got extensive powers, why they can't do more with those powers to bring back into use empty homes.
Okay, and another question we've had through is there any progress towards improving the condition of private rented properties in Wales?
The condition of private rented homes is a really difficult one. We've just done a piece of work called the Living Home Standard, which is a new way of measuring the quality of housing, and the standard is based on what people themselves feel is important, an acceptable minimum standard of living in the 21st century, and that found that the private rented sector in Wales far and away the worst in terms of conditions. I think part of what makes this so difficult is the lack of legal aid for disrepair now, and that's a change that happened a few years ago. So previously we were able to do a lot more to support tenants who wanted to challenge their landlord on disrepair. But I think ultimately part of the problem as well is that private renters have got such low levels of security that actually there's no point taking the legal route with your landlord, because they're just going to issue you with a no-fault eviction notice and you'll be out on your ear. So certainly a lot of our clients who are living in really bad conditions, they just want to move, if it's affecting their health or affecting their children's health, they just want to move on, which is completely understandable. The problem is that those poor conditions stay then there for the next set of tenants to come in.
I think we have to accept that the private rented sector is not homogenous as a word. There are quite a lot of different aspects and sectors in the private rented sector, and there's a high end area, isn't there, where people are actually having very good quality private rented accommodation, but the lower end, and that's often people on low incomes or relying on benefits and there's no other alternative, is often the poorest end as well. So there are real issues about conditions, and of course if you live in poor conditions, then that has all kinds of impacts on your health, your well-being, and increasingly there are more and more families with children in the private rented sector, and the idea of people in that sector with children living in very poor conditions, of course, is a real issue. I mean, as far as Shelter Cymru is concerned, it's one of the biggest areas of our casework. It is private rented tenants and issues like conditions or insecurity or struggling with rents or having problems with landlords. So it's a big issue. So what, 15-16% of housing in Wales, something like that, isn't it, is in the private rented sector. Yeah, it's almost a third of our casework, so it's completely disproportionate to the actual numbers you would expect. Conditions have always been an issue in the private rented sector, and we do need to look at how it's done. There's kind of ideas been floating around about linking housing benefit to improving conditions, but there are issues around that as well. So it is an issue, but we have been, the Welsh Government, to be fair, have recognised this as an issue. The licensing scheme that was introduced, where all landlords should be licensed now under that scheme, is a first step, if you like, of trying to regulate and understand the private rented sector, provide some training to landlords on their responsibilities and indeed their rights as well, of course. And it's kind of one of those first steps towards trying to improve the sector as a whole. But I think it's a long path ahead, really.
Yeah, it is a long path ahead, yeah. And if you're in Wales and you happen to work in housing, you might be interested that the Welsh Government, they've got a consultation out at the moment, so they're seeking the views of the public on their new fitness for human habitation regulations. And this is something that we're going to get in Wales that they don't yet have in England. And I think that our colleagues in Shelter in England are a little bit envious because they were pushing for this in London, unfortunately weren't able to get it then. But it does give some extra rights to tenants to be able to hold their landlord to account. And at the moment we're talking to Welsh Government to work out kind of what that might look like and what additional powers does that actually give tenants to push their own case through the courts. And will they be protected from eviction at the same time when they make that complaint? So it's, you know, it's something that it is obviously on our radar, but I guess ultimately the long-term solution is we need more homes, more affordable homes, because the pressure on the private rented sector is such that landlords don't need to invest that massive amount because they're going to get tenants in anyway. And you know, and a lot of the time landlords who have got a buy-to-let mortgage, a buy-to-rent mortgage, they are you know, paying, you know, over the odds for their housing, as well as the tenants paying over the odds for everyone's paying over the odds for their housing. So we're not getting that investment in conditions that we should.
No, absolutely. I know that the question was about conditions, but as Jenny said, it is very closely linked to security as well, because of the reluctance sometimes to actually ask your landlord to do the repairs that you're paying the rent for the repair to be done, because you're concerned about an eviction. And if you're not on what is called a fixed term, you know, in other words, if you're not on one of those 6-month or some kind of longer term tenancy, then at the moment a landlord can just give you 2 months notice, and if you're still there, if you can't go anywhere else, the landlord can take, you know, that to court, take you to court, and the court will have no choice, assuming the notice has been served properly, but to evict you. So there don't have to be any reasons behind that. The landlord can simply evict you. Now, as long as that insecurity there, that sword is hanging over people, then you can understand why you might be reluctant to say, can you fix this, can you do that, or whatever. So that insecurity is actually not helping in terms of improving conditions. We're very keen to improve security as a way of also improving conditions. Improving security in itself is a good idea, because thousands of tenants, and many of those will be families with children, are living literally on a month-to-month basis, not knowing, they may not know this, but they're not knowing from one month to the next whether they might suddenly get a notice from the landlord. Really need to do something about that, and we've already got a discussion, a debate going. We know some AMs are interested in this, about how we can do that. Can we create a longer tenancy in Wales for people, or can we end that kind of what is called no-fault eviction approach?
Yeah, I feel like we're finally starting to get somewhere on private renter security of tenure. After plugging away at this for several years, people are starting to listen now, and you know, I think that it'll be a really interesting area to watch over the years to come. Certainly, we've had successes around letting fees as well. Welsh Government have now announced that they will be banning letting fees to tenants after the work that we did. It was our campaign supporters that did a mystery shop of letting agents across Wales. It was a fantastic exercise. All of our campaign supporters going out and gathering data on how much letting fees, what kind of fees letting agents were charging. And Welsh Government listened, you know, and I feel optimistically they will listen to us on security too.
Just in case you just joined us, my name's John Puzey, Director of Shelter Cymru, and we're talking about Shelter Cymru's campaigns and ideas you may have.
I'm Jennie Bibbings, I'm Campaigns Manager.
Okay, so another comment we've had through is his son is soon to be homeless. He's received a Section 21, has been unable to get through to us on the phone.
Oh dear.
Well, I think, Section 21, of course, is what we were just talking about. Section 21 describes a no-fault eviction. This is the issue that if it's been served properly, then there is no real defence. Although I should say that your son shouldn't leave simply because they got the notice. The notice is the landlord telling them, and there should be 2 months' notice. And it is in the end a court who decides about evictions, not the landlord. I think it's really important. Really sorry you can't get through. I'm assuming you're trying to get through to our Shelter Cymru Live. It is a very, very busy service, and I think that just demonstrates, you know, the issues we've been saying. There are so many people there with housing problems, and we've got, you know, limited capacity. It's a very good service, but we've got limited capacity. So the only thing I can suggest is keep trying. You could try our advice online, our website, to see if there's any help there, some advice there, but keep trying the phone line. I'm sure you will get through.
You can also email as well. We do email advice, and it does sound as though your son could do with some advice, because you know, he does have some rights to assistance by the council, and there are some possible defences to the Section 21 as well. So if the landlord isn't registered with Rent Smart Wales, then that means that the notice is invalid. And if the landlord hasn't protected the deposit, again, that means that the notice will be invalid. So that it's not going to hold off the eviction forever, but it will just buy your son a bit more time to look at what his other options are. If he goes to the local authority, the Housing Options Service, They might be able to help him with, for example, if he needs some help with bond for a new place, they'll help him look for affordable accommodation in the area as well. So if he hasn't tried to talk to the council, then that will be another option too. But yeah, please keep trying, and email us too, because we get lots of email advice these days. I think almost half of the Shelter Cymru Live activity now is email based, so they will get back to you.
They'll get back to you, yeah.
And another question, do you think a land value tax system would be better than the current council tax system?
Ooh.
Oh, one of my favourite subjects. Sounds a bit sad, really, doesn't it? It's certainly something that we should be looking at. It's probably overcomplicated about this, but the idea of what it's called a land valuation tax, it's got a few other names as well, is that you kind of lay an annual tax on the undeveloped element of the land, yeah, and you collect an income that way from it. You know, the government, obviously, or the local government collects that income. And the idea is that if you do that, then it's more likely to mean there won't be land banking. That's the idea of actually holding on to land and speculating on land, so its value increases. And of course, if land value increases, that means that when you build a house on it, the cost of the house goes up as well, because land obviously is a part of the total cost of building a home. So the argument is it's a tax that can help with reducing land costs, reducing land scarcity, which is an issue in terms of building new homes and helping to build new homes. But it's also been argued it could be an alternative to our current regressive council tax, because obviously a council tax at the moment doesn't respond to the income of a household. It's simply based on bands, as you all know, in which your home is in one or the other of the bands, and you get taxed on that basis. So, I mean, I think we feel that council tax is not a good way of collecting local income, and there should be an alternative. I work there, I know that the Welsh Government are looking at alternatives. I know they're thinking about local income taxes as a way of raising new income, which of course would be a progressive tax, would be based on your income. But certainly I know that the Welsh Government are interested in taxing on land, and whether that could be an alternative as well. I've even seen recently arguments that land taxes could be a way of actually funding universal income. You know, the idea that everybody should get a basic, reasonable level of income to live on, regardless, and that a land tax would be a better way of doing that. So all kinds of possible benefits, lots of potential benefits with that kind of approach. A bit complicated, but I can give you one really good example of how a land tax could have worked in a beneficial way. If you talk to people who are very interested in land tax, they always give you this example, and it's the building of the Jubilee Line, the Jubilee Line extension a few years ago. All of us in Britain who are taxpayers helped contribute, whether we wanted to or not, to the building of the Jubilee Line extension. Whether we lived there, whether we ever used it, didn't matter. It was a taxpayer's burden, as it were. And I can't remember how much it was. Quite a lot of taxpayers' money went into it. But in fact, what the Jubilee Line did was that because it opened up a whole bunch of new stations and communications and transport, all the properties along that line went up massively in value, a huge amount in value. So basically, those of us who are taxpayers helped increase a few hundred people living on the Jubilee Line's land values by a massive amount of money. The idea of land tax is you would recover that additional funding, that additional value for the community, rather than simply let it go into individual private hands. And I think it's a really interesting approach, and one we should be actively exploring in Wales, and I think we are actually. I think the government are interested in those kind of approaches.
It's very exciting to hear it could be linked with universal basic income. I mean, what better way to end homelessness by ending poverty?
Yeah.
But yeah, it is encouraging that Welsh Government are looking at this, and I think it's partly because council tax benefit was devolved a few years ago, and Welsh Government have got this growing bill to foot to help people pay their council tax when they can't afford it themselves, and that's kind of been the driver of this. There's just so many ways in which it could be improved. I mean, yesterday there was in the news Torfaen Council, wasn't it, who were the first council in the UK to exempt care leavers aged 18 to 21 from paying council tax. And I mean, how appalling is it that care leavers should be charged council tax? It's like your parents taxing you at the age of 18 to 21. It's ridiculous. Many better ways in which it could be done.
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you have any thoughts on what social landlords can do to prepare for the move to shared route?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? The shared rate, this is the reason that this question's come through, of course, is that changes to local housing allowances in the next couple of years, now 2019, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. Will affect, in particular, single under 35-year-old people. And they will see their housing benefit fall dramatically from what it is now down to what is called a shared room rate. So in other words, a shared room rate would be a lot less, and is a lot less, everywhere in Wales, a lot less than just a single room payment. Single room payment, an ordinary kind of flat or apartment payment. Big differences in the amount of rent wanted and the kind of benefits young people will get, and that kind of gap would seem very difficult to bridge. So everybody's very concerned about this issue. Social landlords, all of us are very concerned about this issue, and I know that some social landlords are looking at developing more shared accommodation in response. I've seen some interesting ideas, some schemes about bringing in very effective housing that reduces your fuel bills quite considerably, so much so that it almost allows, you're always in a situation where if you're on that single room rate, you can probably just about save enough from not having to pay so much on your electricity and gas and bridge the gap between the rent and the amount of money. So it's actually forcing some innovation, I guess, around those areas. I think it's appalling that we're actually having to face this problem, but it is a difficult one. It is a tough one, and I know everybody's very concerned about it.
Yeah, I think, I'm definitely picking up in Wales that that housing associations are very actively engaged in looking at what the options are, and that they're not just giving up and deciding not to let under 35s anymore. They are putting a lot of work into scoping out alternatives, and we're working quite closely with some housing associations on this as well to kind of draw together all of the good practice. It's going to be really difficult, and I know that in Wales, young people are already priced out of a lot of privately rented housing, and and are very reliant on social housing now. And if they can't access social housing, then there are literally no options for young people under 35s anymore. I wonder whether we have kind of fully scoped out what the potential might be for lowering rents. I know that's potentially a controversial one, but and it's one that housing associations are going to be very defensive about, of course, but what potential is there to lower some of these rents, which have kind of been as comfortably high as they are allowed to be within the current system. Yeah,
I think there's a kind of a bigger issue. Well, I think it's a big enough issue with so many thousands of under 35s. In fact, I think there's probably proportionately more under 35 single people going to be affecting Wales than any other part of the United Kingdom. But there's a big issue here, isn't there? And it's all about housing benefit, basically, and the £1 billion that's spent in Wales by housing benefit. And of course, all the rules about housing benefit, how housing benefit is allocated, etc., is decided not in Wales, it's decided in London. And we're constantly reacting to those decisions being made in London. So in Wales, we have housing is evolved, so we can develop our own housing strategy. We've been talking earlier, introduce our own legislation. But housing benefit is not in our control, and housing benefit is such a key element of making homes affordable. So I guess Shelter Cymru is just asking the question: should we be exploring the devolution of at least some aspects of housing benefit, take some control of some of that aspect, so we're better able to make affordable homes for people. If you just think about what we might have been able to avoid in the past, perhaps we could have avoided bedroom tax in Wales if we controlled housing benefit more effectively. Perhaps if we could avoid this issue that's happening to under 35. So it's something I think again we need to explore. I mean, it would be a big step, and there are clear risks as well, of course. But it's something we should actively explore, I think, given that we are constantly having the carpet pulled from under us when we're trying to develop good quality housing, good quality affordable homes, and trying to build what I would describe as a progressive housing strategy.
Absolutely. Okay, we've had an email through. What is the next big change we should campaign for in homelessness?
Ooh.
Where to begin?
Yeah, which one?
Gosh, I mean, we're doing a number of pieces of research, I should say. We've been doing research over the last 2 years to to be able to understand how all of these changes in Welsh homelessness have affected people and how differently they're being helped now. And some of the recommendations that we've made to the government off the back of that, they are putting into motions now. But for the next, what we think we need to look at next is the people who are still falling through the gaps of the current system. And granted, you know, we all know that moving to this new system meant that there would be a smaller gap in the safety net than there used to be, but nevertheless those gaps are still there, and we're seeing a lot of people drop out. For example, you know, a lot of people just lose contact with councils. There are also quite a lot of people who are, unfortunately, priority need is still an issue. So so basically with the new system, whether or not you're in a priority need group or not, that shouldn't be considered at the outset. They should just help you, and it's only if that help doesn't work and you get to the end of the stage that they look at, are you in priority need or not? And if you are, then you do get a bit of extra help, and if you're not, then they say, I'm sorry, we can't help you anymore. And we are still seeing quite a lot of people in that circumstance. So they're homeless, you know, they need a roof over their head, but they're not in a, you know, a priority need group. So we are doing some work to understand, you know, the reasons why people are falling through the net still, what's happening to them as a result, you know, where are they ending up, and how could we do things better?
Yeah, I guess underpinning all of this is everything you've been saying today. The issue, the underpinning issue here is the lack of affordable homes. Yeah, so we do need, I think, to look at priority need groups again. And you know, we were talking about under 35s. Maybe there's certain groups which are going to be particularly vulnerable, and we need to think about that. But if we simply increase the number of people that might be accepted as priority need, without actually increasing the amount of affordable homes, we're simply going to have a lot more people in temporary accommodation. So you know, it's absolutely vital that we have more affordable homes. There is a 20,000 target that the Welsh Government have agreed, and that's great. We need even more than that, so we really need to do everything we possibly can to build more homes, and as we were saying earlier, to bring current empty homes back into use to meet that need. Just another thing about, I know the question was about homelessness, what's the next big thing, and there, as Jenny said, a number of big things really. But I think it's, I think what we've got to accept is there is probably more that we could all do in Wales to kind of shut off the flow, if you like, of homelessness. An awful lot of people who come to our service, or indeed who go to local authorities facing or experiencing homelessness, they're often because of something else that didn't work properly for them, or a service that didn't operate properly for them. Or, you know, for example, some local authorities had extra money from London, it's called discretionary housing payments, to help people in need. And some local authorities gave some of that money back at the end of the year. They didn't spend it all, and yet we know there's a huge amount of demand from people who need help and assistance keeping in their homes. So, you know, how many people have turned up because who could have been helped through discretionary housing payments? How many people turn up to services like ours or local authorities who shouldn't have been evicted in the first place? Perhaps they've got a mental health illness that wasn't recognised. So what can we do, you know, further up the line, as it were, to actually help shut off the flow of people who are getting to that crisis point in terms of delivering more effective services to them and more effective help? There are things that are out of our control. You know, there's the economy, there's austerity, there's decisions made in London which aren't currently under our control, but there is a lot more we can do in Wales, I think, to reduce the level of homelessness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, another question we've had through: what are you planning to do when it comes to youth homelessness?
Yeah, I guess in a sense we've been touching on that, haven't we? Because there are issues, as we already said, about under 35s, under 21s as well, in universal credit. Youth homelessness is a major issue for us in Wales, and there's now a relaunched campaign ending youth homelessness in Wales, and the aim of that campaign is over the next 10 years to effectively do that. End youth homelessness has got the backing of the First Minister and the Welsh Government. And it's all about, I think, how there's a whole range of different ways we should be intervening to help young people from the very beginning. So recognising, if you like, the signals, the signs that might mean that a young person is going to end up possibly homeless. So, for example, if there's a relationship breakup, that could be a sign. that the young person might be a bit at risk. You know, if there's issues of abuse in the family, that could be a sign that a young person's at risk. So how do we intervene? How do we identify those young people who might be at risk before they become homeless, and how do we effectively intervene? I'm asking the question almost rhetorically because I'm not entirely sure, but clearly we do need to try and develop those kind of approaches. The Welsh Government are very concerned also about adverse childhood experiences. They're called ACEs. And there's quite a lot of work going on around ACEs, isn't there, and trying to do some recognition work around that.
Yes, we've been pushing this over the last few years, and I think that in terms of the whole culture change thing that we've been talking about in homelessness, more understanding about adverse childhood experiences is so important. And Welsh Government are putting some money into training so that frontline workers across Wales can understand how to work with people if they've had traumatic early life experiences. We've got some really good practice in Wales, and the one that always jumps out at me is the George Street project, which is run by Solace, and that's a supported accommodation project for young care leavers. They never exclude, they never evict. They work with those young people in a very trauma-informed way, and it's a very sophisticated way of working with young people who've had problems. We also have our education service as well, and that's something that I don't think enough people know about our education service, which is working with schools across Wales to deliver leaving home education. So it's that basic stuff that when I was at school, I remember thinking, why aren't I learning about how to manage a bank account? Why aren't I learning? No one ever taught me any of that stuff, you know. And it is so important. So we've got our education officer, Sean, and he works with schools in Wales, but wouldn't it be better if we had that as part of the curriculum so that every young person in Wales had education in how to manage when they leave home? I know getting stuff on the curriculum is really difficult. We have been trying over the last few years, and it's something that we will keep plugging away at.
Another email we've had through: who should you inform if you have a housing issue?
Well, you can contact us. Our advice line number is 0345 075 5005, and that's open during normal office hours. It can get very busy at times, that's the only issue. Demand on our service is very, very high. We do also take advice by email as well, so if you go to the website and you can email us. And we do have surgeries across the whole of Wales, so if you go on the website, and you can also download our app as well. We've got an app called Housing Help app, and it's free to download, and that gives you all of our advice online information. So that's pages and pages and pages of advice on what you can do in all sorts of different situations, and it also tells you about where our surgeries are. So if you want to go and speak to a housing law caseworker face to face, you can do that. Some of them are appointment, some of them are drop-in, but have a look on the website or download the app, and that will tell you where our surgeries are.
A very important point to make about our services, and I think sometimes people don't realise it, is that much of our work is about preventing homelessness. I think people feel, because we're called Shelter Cymru, that we're actually working almost exclusively with people who become homeless, and clearly lots of people who come to our service are homeless, but many more are actually facing homelessness, and in over 9 out of 10 cases in those circumstances, we're able to prevent homelessness. So the message should always be, whether it's you or anybody you know, get advice as early as possible. Get in touch with organisations like Shelter Cymru, and if we, the earlier we're able to work with somebody, the more likely we are to come with a successful conclusion. The message is, it's all about preventing homelessness wherever possible.
Okay, well, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you very much for your questions, and if you are watching this after the live broadcast, then you can put your questions in the comments boxes and we will do our best to answer them. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thank you very much.